everyone, my name is Keely. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. Today I'm going to talk about all the books I read in the month of September. In September I read 11 books and that was 4,108 pages, so I was very happy with that. It was a pretty high page count. As far as ratings go, I had 0 1-star, 1 2-star, 5 3-stars, 2 4-stars, 2 5-stars, and then 1 book that I did not rate. So I'm not going to go too in-depth with my thoughts and feelings in this video because I vlogged every single book that I read this month. At the beginning of the month, I did my first TBR takedown episode where I read books that I owned that I knew nothing about. And then I also had 3 Bookoplathon vlogs, which meant that I vlogged every week in September and I talked about all these books already. So if you are interested in more in-depth thoughts and feelings about any of these books, definitely go check out any of my vlogs from this month. So starting with DNFs, I did have 2, and I DNF'd The Lost Years by T.A. Barron and Indy My Own Spring by Matthew Skelton. Now both of these books I kind of had similar feelings. So in Merlin I read 141 pages and in Indy My Own Spring I read 115 pages, and these books weren't bad, they just were not for me. As I was reading this one, it was so slow and so boring, and I realized it is the first book in a 12-book series, so I just did not feel like I needed to continue. And Indy My Own Spring had interesting parts, but unfortunately the more boring parts outweighed the interest, so I put these down. The first book I completed in September was The Night We Burned by S.F. Kosa. This is a dual timeline story. The first timeline we follow is the year 2000. We follow Dora Rodriguez as she is getting involved in a cult. We now know that this cult ended in a terrible fire where dozens of people were killed. In the present timeline, we also follow Dora, who now works as an online fact checker for a magazine. Unfortunately, it has been 20 years since this cult and the survivors are turning up dead. So one of her co-workers decides to investigate, and nobody knows that Dora was involved with this cult, so she decides to fib the facts so nobody will figure out her past. I loved this book so much. Both of the timelines were so fascinating and so intriguing. I could not put it down. There was never one point where I preferred one timeline over the other. I was interested in both, and I also love that we know that something major happened to this cult, but we don't know how or why it happened. So it's kind of leading up to this big penultimate event, and it was just so like on the edge of your seat because you want to know what happens next. The pacing in this book is a little bit slower, but I think it is perfect for the way that this story is told. I just thought it was so fascinating and I really loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. Now we follow a married couple who both work in a hospital and they just really want a child, but unfortunately they're unable to have one. One day a young girl comes into this hospital and she has been severely neglected and abused, and so this couple starts forming a relationship with this little girl and they end up bringing her into their home and adopting her. Unfortunately, she is not so much the perfect child, and weird, creepy, scary things start happening. I really enjoyed this one. I was hoping it would go a little bit darker with it, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought that some of the characters were infuriating, and I am Team Hannah all the way. The wife, I fully believe her and I'm on her side. I feel so bad for her, but I was also angry at some parts and I was disturbed at some parts and I was sad at some parts. It brought out so many emotions, but yes, I did have a great time reading it and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kimmerer. Now this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and we follow Harper, who lives in DC, and Harper has cerebral palsy, so I really enjoyed reading a fantasy book with that representation. And one day, as Harper is waiting for her brother to come home from a scary owes money to people kind of situation, she sees this man trying to kidnap a girl, and she is like, that's not gonna happen, so she takes a crowbar, goes after this man, and he kind of teleports her to a fantasy world where Prince Ren is trying to save his kingdom from this monster, and Harper gets involved with Prince Ren and is trying to ultimately help him save the kingdom. I got so hooked with this one. I loved it so much. I love the characters, I love the world, and I really can't explain all the way why I loved it so much. I just could not put it down. I was so interested. I love Harper, I love Ren, and I love Gray. Gray in this book is Rin's like captain of the guard, and he reminds me so much of Kale from the Throne of Glass series, and if you know me, Kale's my favorite character. So I really enjoyed all the characters. I love the world that it was set in, and I loved the whole plot and the story aspect, because when I picked this up, I didn't realize Harper was like a real world girl that gets taken to another world, and I really loved it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is Agatha Christie's first Detective Poirot novel. So this is set at a manor called Styles, and somebody ends up dead. And that's basically it. That's basically the gist of all of Agatha Christie's books. I cannot connect to Agatha Christie's books, unfortunately. She has so many characters that I cannot ever remember who is married to who's connected to who's sleeping with who, any of that. I have no idea what's going on. So when I go into her books, I'm like, I'm just gonna be lost, okay? I'm just gonna be completely clueless. I also don't like the writing style, which I know is probably controversial because it's Agatha Christie, but her books are so dialogue heavy. There is no explanation. We would jump to scenes and I wouldn't know where we were until halfway through the conversation. I also don't like in books how there are no hints dropped to who the murderer is, and then suddenly there's a chapter and there's a whole big explanation and you're like, okay, but you didn't leave us any clues to figure out along the way. So ultimately I give this one 2 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up was Eternally Yours, which is an anthology edited by Patricia Caldwell. There are, I believe, 15 short stories in this. There are several authors that I had read from and several authors I had never read from, and these are all paranormal romance stories, which paranormal romance is one of my favorite genres of all time. I have always been a Twilight girly, and I always will. My average rating for this anthology came out to 3.8 stars. There are some 5-star stories in here. I also believe I gave some 1-star stories. But once again, I did vlog and update every story in one of my Bookathon vlogs, so definitely go check that out if you're interested to hear my thoughts on all the different stories. Next, I read All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. This is a coming-of-age story about 2 Pakistani-American teenagers as they try to basically have a happy life, because they really don't. They face a lot of struggles and obstacles, and it is very difficult to read. There is nothing happy about this book. I don't think one happy thing happened in this book. I will say Sabaa Tahir's writing is beautiful. I already knew that, and I love her writing so much. There were many times in this book where I wanted to DNF it because I was so uncomfortable. But there are people out there who actually live lives like this, that face the racism, that face living in a country where people don't accept you. I am very privileged. I am a white American cisgender girl. Like, I have so much privilege, and if I could be uncomfortable for 370 pages, I owed it to these people to do this, because they go through this in their daily lives, and I, at the end of the day, get to put this down, and I get to step out of being uncomfortable where a lot of their lives are that uncomfortable feeling, and they don't get to just put it down, you know? So I owed it to Sabaa Tahir, these characters, and the people who actually go through this to be uncomfortable for the amount of time it took me to read this. I will say I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because my enjoyment was not there. Like I said, I did not enjoy this book, but I realized how important it is for people out there, and it really just showed me even more of a struggle that some people have out there, and I am so privileged. I'm so blessed with the life I live, and this is definitely a educational book. If this is something that you don't go through, I definitely recommend it, but just know that it is very difficult and it is not a happy read. Speaking of not a happy read, I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I'm sure I don't need to tell you what this is about, but Jeanette McCurdy is somebody that I basically grew up with. I watched her all the time on my TV. I listened to all of her music as it came out, and so reading her memoir and finding out the background story of all the things that I watched growing up or listened to growing up was just like eye-opening. So this one I actually did not rate. Next, I read Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. Like I said earlier, Kale is my favorite character. He is the only character I like. Everyone else can go choke, you know. But this is Kale's story, which was so refreshing because Empire of Storms before this was one of the worst books I've ever read. And so it was nice because in this book, we only see Kale. We don't see the rest of the crew, which is a heaven-sent blessing. Like, thank you. But yes, I really loved Yrene in this. This is another character we are introduced to, so it's nice to actually like more than one character for once. There was some times in here where I was bored with Nesrin's chapters because we get Kale chapters and Nesrin's chapters, and there were times at the beginning where I was like, I don't care about Nesrin, I just want to read Kale. But then about maybe a little over halfway through, I started getting really interested in Nesrin's chapters, and I ended up actually coming to like her. So now that's 3 characters that I like. How exciting. But yes, I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars because there were times where I was like, Sarah, this is way too long. Like, why are you doing this? This is too long. Just show me the good parts and be done with it. So the next book I read was All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. This is a dual timeline story. The first time we follow is 1994, and a young 6-year-old named January Jacobs is murdered. Decades later, we follow Margot in the present, and Margot is a journalist, and Margot actually was friends with January Jacobs when she was little. Margot moves back to the town to stay with her uncle, who is struggling with like dementia or Alzheimer's, it's never really said, when another girl goes missing. So Margot is trying to figure out this mystery and who this killer is that is killing little girls. So this one was kind of slow. I wasn't really interested in either of the timelines. Both of them were kind of boring, but there was still a part of me that wanted to keep reading to find out what was going on. The ending was so, like, aggravating. I don't know what that ending was. I did read an e-arc copy, so I don't know if it's just because it was an e-arc or if that's actually how it ended, but I hated the ending. So I give this one 3 out of 5 stars because there was a little bit of intrigue there, but I also just had so many mixed emotions because I thought it was boring, I thought it was slow, and I hated the ending. The next book I read from Kindle Unlimited, and that is True Crime by Samantha Kolesnik, and this is a horror novella following 2 siblings who go on a murdering road trip. So the road trip part was only for about half of the story, and then the other half was something different, and the road trip aspect was so much more interesting than the rest of the story. Now, I don't know if this is classified as extreme horror, but just know that there are a lot of disturbing things in here, so trigger warnings if you're interested in picking it up, because the cover is really interesting, and that was why I was interested in picking it up. And I don't have any triggers, so extreme horror doesn't bother me. I just don't know if this is classified as that. But yeah, the first half was a lot more interesting than the second half, so I also gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book I read was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This is a reread for me, so I can finally continue the series. So this is set in the 1800s, obviously during Jack the Ripper's reign, and we follow Audrey Rose. Now, Audrey Rose's uncle is a medical examiner and performs all the autopsies, and he is really into science, which in this day and age, science was kind of blasphemous, and people were like, he's crazy. Now, Audrey Rose helps her uncle and dissects bodies and does all the things that a young lady in the 1800s should not be doing. So also we follow Thomas Cresswell, who is her uncle's assistant, and he's kind of this mysterious, like, dark, handsome stranger that Audrey Rose gets connected with. Now, anything with Jack the Ripper is so fascinating for me. I love learning about his story, and also just knowing that if DNA evidence existed back then, he would have been caught so quickly. I fully believe Jack the Ripper left evidence just everywhere. But Audrey Rose is a character I really love. I also liked Thomas Cresswell. I don't think I like him as much as most people do, because most people are completely obsessed with him, and for me, I'm just like, oh, okay, he's cool, I like him. But yes, there's something about this book, I just don't know why I can't give it a full 5 stars. This is like my perfect setup for a book, but I only give it 4 stars just because I can't feel that 5 stars in my bones, you know, but I still really enjoy it, and I really think that I'm going to love the other books even more. So those are all the books that I read in the month of September. Let me know your favorite book that you read this month. If you have made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave the little knife emoji because she's holding a knife and like Jack the Ripper. But that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, all my social media links will be down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!